Well, today's episode is going to feel a little bit different, and that's because I really have no notes. I really have no, direction, really, of the episode. It's more of just, I want to have a conversation, and I want to share with you what God has shared with me, and just talk through some things. Normally on this podcast, we open up the Bible and we look at a passage and we break it down and we talk about it as it relates to the topic or the point that we're talking about. And while today we are going to use the Bible, we're not going to use it in that way. It's going to be more of a reference as we refer to a story that we've looked at a couple different times on this podcast within the last year. And so what I believe, though, is that what we're talking about today is highly talked about. It's talked about everywhere. It's talked about in households. It's talked about by parents with their kids and all of this stuff. It's the idea of this distraction-driven world that we live in and how that might be affecting our relationships and what that looks like if we aren't always distracted. And we're going to look at, like I said, a familiar story that we've looked at even just a couple months ago. But what I feel is that while distractions are a big part of the time we spend with other people, it's not necessarily that the distractions are a bad thing. So, I know that might be weird to say, because sometimes we think of spending time with somebody, whether it's our spouse, whether it's our kids, whether it's our neighbors or whatever. We find ourselves trying to get rid of those distractions. Hey, put the phone away and let's have a conversation. Or why do you got to always have your phone out? Or things like that, right? We always try to do that, but some of the time, we can have a conversation with the distractions, and we can have some good quality time with each other. But it's that finding that balance. For this series, we've been using a reference to the 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And as I said in the very first episode of this series, that while that book is written specifically toward marriages, there's other books that are written for your teenagers, for your all these different things. The love languages remain the same. And so I got thinking, what if we use those love languages and we just look at them from the standpoint of how we can love better in those languages. So taking the love languages and utilizing them from the standpoint of love and how that affects our relationships. And so we've talked about the words that we use. We've talked about now in quality time is what we're talking about today. And so this would be the second of the love languages. We are definitely embarking on this journey together. And so as we get to this time, as I've said, and this idea of distractions and all of that, people tend to freak out a little bit more. We didn't have all of this distractions growing up. We didn't have blah, 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 blah. And the truth of the matter is, we did. It just looked different. It wasn't as readily available as, I have 4 kids. It's not as, these distractions when I was a kid weren't as, when I was a kid in the 90s, okay? It wasn't as bad, right? We didn't have them at our fingertips, where we could sit there in the room with somebody and everybody's on a phone. If you look around, you see a group of kids and a group of, they're just kind of all on their phones. And every once in a while they'll say something or they'll show something or they'll have conversations. That's why I said, the things we label as distractions may not always be a distraction, right? It's more, it helps the conversation. It's more of maybe the time that we're living in, right? It's a sign of the times type thing, that their conversations come from things they might see on YouTube shorts or these social media reels and things like that. And so, but what I'm saying is these distractions, while they're more easy accessible, they were still available even way back in the 50s and in the 90s when I grew up. Like, these distractions were still there. But nowadays, it's more like, put your phone away so we can have a conversation, or why are you always on that, or why do you always have to have the TV on, or all these different things, right? And so, like, for example, back in the 50s, there's a show called I Love Lucy. And you may be familiar with it. It's probably one of the most familiar shows for me. I grew up watching it and listening to it, and it's just kind of like one of my, like, if I need some background noise or whatever, I just put on that show, and it's just, it's really, I could probably quote 95% of the episodes or tell you within the first, like, 5 seconds of the episode what it is, right? But in those episodes, there are different times where you can see, like, the distractions. But it's not prominent to us because of what it is, right? So there are some times where they come in and Lucy is encouraging the other cast members in this particular episode that she doesn't want to watch TV this time. Like, she just wants to sit around and have a conversation, right? And they kind of jeer at it. They kind of like, no, we'll not watch TV. And so, like, they wind up watching TV. But while they're watching TV, they kind of conversate around what they're watching. There's one episode where Ricky and Lucy are sitting at the breakfast table. And Ricky is sitting there with the newspaper up, and Lucy's just kind of sitting there. You can see she's bored. You can see that she doesn't like being ignored. And he's just buried himself in this newspaper. Well, I see that when I look at that, like you're burying it in your doom scrolling right on your phone, right? Or you're reading and constantly, like, looking at social media and all of that stuff, right? So he's sitting there and he's buried, and she's sitting at the other side of the breakfast table, just being ignored, right? It's there. It's prominent even back then. And so there's another episode and the same kind of thing where he comes home from work and she's ready to kind of talk about his day and see what's going on and do all of these things. But he sits down and picks up the newspaper and starts to read it. Even in my own life, like, my grandfather, he would sit at the kitchen table, or he would sit at his little, like, there's, like, not what really wasn't an island, but it was like the spot where he would sit. It was right by the phone, because he had to be by the phone. So, like, when the phone rang, he could answer. Like, it was, like, so, but he would always be sitting there, and he would read the newspaper cover to cover. And nothing else in the world existed. There could be a fire going on in the kitchen, and he would be sitting there reading his newspaper. He would read it cover to cover almost every day. It was very rare when you would go over there, if it was especially early enough in the morning, where you wouldn't see him sitting there with a newspaper in his hand, reading the newspaper, ignoring pretty much everything and everybody else in the house. You'd have to, like, literally, hey, like, Grandpa, like, I'm talking, and he would be like, what? Like, so it was just a very unique kind of thing. And then even in the 90s, it was still like one of those things, because you got video games now, and you could play it on your TV. And I can remember times where my friends and I, we would sit and we would have conversations surrounding the game we were playing. Mario Kart, just whatever the game that we were playing. We could all play together, and we would just sit there in the same room, and we would have conversations surrounding the game or while we were playing the game. Some of the best conversations that I've had with some people have been around some type of game or some type of, like, what would be labeled as a distraction. I volunteer at church, and for a season we had kind of video games in the room. And you would see the kids kind of converse, or I would stand there and just kind of like, hey, so how's your week? And like, it's almost like the distraction was providing a space for conversation. And then even still today, like, as I volunteer with students, like, you can see them and they're sitting over there and they're having the same kind of, like, community almost that I had while they're playing Smash Brothers is the big one. And you can just hear them, and they're having fun, and they're having conversations with each other. And it may not be like what we think to be a distraction. I mean, we may not, conversation, because it looks like a distraction. And so, as I'm talking about this, I want to encourage you, if you have a copy of the Bible, whether it's paper or electronic, open it on up to John chapter 4. And if you've been with the podcast a little bit, first thing comes to your mind is John chapter 4. Well, this isn't the Shining Light series. This isn't where this isn't that, right? And no, it's not. And if you haven't been with us for a little bit and you don't know what Shining Light is, it's our study in the Gospel of John that we started just over a year ago. And we've been kind of trekking through the Gospel of John, verse by verse, section by section type thing. And so if you want to catch up with that, or you want to check out more about that, you can go to our website, thepointofocus.com, and you can find that. And it's on our YouTube channel, kind of all in a playlist, so you can follow those. But we've been in that, and we just recently did a series within that Shining Light series called Conversations with Jesus, and we looked at John chapter 4 for about 4 weeks. 4 episodes, we kind of looked through John chapter 4, so just recently we did that. And then last year we did a series called The Jesus Way, where we also looked at John chapter 4. So this has been a very, very prominent chapter in our conversations here on this podcast, but it's also been a very prominent chapter in my own life, because really, like lately, I was just talking with somebody at my church. She's one of the members of the student team, and was talking about John 4. And her and I kind of talked about it real briefly, about how, like, if you want to, like, kind of see some different things, like, for some reason, John chapter 4 just kind of, like, hooks you up. And that's the way it's been for me. And for this conversation that we're talking about today, this idea of time, this idea of quality time, or this idea of distraction-free time, it's all here in John chapter 4. The reason why I had you turn there is because we will reference today different parts of that story. We will not be referencing it in reading it in a way. We will be just referring to it, because this idea of time, and like I said, what's a distraction? Is it really a distraction, or is it just a conversation point, or is it helpful to the conversation? Gary Chapman says in his book, The 5 Love Languages, that, quality time and, spending good time with somebody doesn't necessarily mean you're staring into their eyes and you're all of this stuff, if you're married, or like having them in the same room and just staring at each other with your kids or your friends or whatever. I think this idea of non-hurried, just quality, distraction-free time, but also, too, the distractions can lend to conversations. When you're sitting around and you're watching a TV show, and you're just sitting there and you're kind of having a conversation about the TV show, or while the TV show's on, or whatever. And this idea of modeling how Jesus spent his time is depicted here in John chapter 4. Because oftentimes I find myself trying to have a conversation with somebody, and I find myself kind of like, come on, I got to get to my next thing. Like, they're trying to have a conversation with you, but your mind is distracted because you're trying to get to the next thing. It often frustrates me sometimes, especially at work. Like, I can stand and shoot the breeze with somebody for 10 to 15 minutes, and we're having a good conversation and all of that stuff, right? But then, like, sometimes people want to talk to me when I'm kind of like going from thing to thing to thing, and it's a busier day for me, and I don't have time to just stand there and have a conversation. It's kind of like, you can talk to me anytime. There are times we pass each other, and I've got all the time in the world to talk, and now you want to talk when I'm kind of like in a hurry. I find myself doing it with my neighbors or my friends as well, where they want to stand and they want to have a conversation, but you got to get to like the next thing. Maybe that's the distraction. Maybe it's less about our phones or TV or video games or things like that. Those can be a distraction, don't get me wrong. But maybe it's the time that Jesus wants us to spend with people, our spouse, our kids, our neighbors, and our friends. It is not just hurried time, where we're like listening to them, but we're like already on to the next thing because we're already late, or we're trying to like do that. And as I speak, like I was taking somebody for work to their appointment, and they bumped into somebody that they knew, and it's kind of like, well, you got to get to your appointment. So I was kind of like trying not to rush him. I was trying to honor the conversation, right? But it's like, you got to get to this appointment. And I wonder how oftentimes that is what happens with our time a little bit more. And I'm not talking about like how we like spend our time, but like, because everybody's got a busy calendar. Like there are people in like my own calendar is busy with 4 kids, like with kids in general, like the calendar gets busy, this thing and that thing and this event and that event and going here, going there. It's busy. I'm not necessarily talking about the calendar, but I'm just talking about the time that we often hurry through with the people that we're supposed to care about, with the people that Jesus would want us to stop and talk to. You see, Jesus was never hurried. Jesus was never rushed when he was having a conversation with people. And even still, he was never really hurried anyway. Like, he was never rushed. He was never, oh my gosh, I gotta get to the next thing. You know, never in the Bible does it say, you know, hey, and Jesus went through Samaria and he had to talk to this woman at the well, but he had to hurry the conversation because he had to hurry up and get to where he was going. Or anything like that. Like, you never see that. Or it's like Jesus stopped to have a conversation with somebody, but he rushed off because he had to go to a meeting. And that's where it got me. We see in John chapter 4, he goes through this town that he was Jewish. It was Samaria. Going through the town was just a questionable decision to begin with because of the relationship that they had. But that right there shows that Jesus was making time to go into a place, right, that didn't have, that needed him. And he was going to talk to a woman that needed him. And the thing is that was already kind of like one of those things, right? He was a rabbi, and he was a man, and he was going to talk to this woman, a Samaritan woman at that. And rabbis, as I said in our past episodes on this chapter, as I said in the Conversation with Jesus series or the Jesus Way series, which is back, like, they didn't talk about, rabbis typically didn't sometimes even talk to their own female family members. And he was going out of his way to talk to this woman. And their conversation wasn't distraction-free. There was lots of distractions. Remember Jesus' humanity. So Jesus was human, and the way I'm looking at this story and with fresh eyes is he was probably, as a human, maybe distracted at the fact that this woman is at the well at high noon, during the heat of the day, and by herself. Okay, so why is that? I mean, Jesus as God already knew, but Jesus as a human being may have been having some thoughts. Hey, wait a minute, why is she here? What is she doing here? And she had, like, her own distractions. Like, why is this Jewish man talking to me? Why is he asking me for water? And then they crack open the door of the, like, kind of like the elephant in the room, right? Like, where she talks about her lifestyle and the fact that, you know, she's had 5 husbands and she's living with somebody that's not her husband, and all of those, like, what would be considered distractions. Distractions for Jesus to have good, genuine conversations with somebody, right? And the thing is Jesus kind of goes through that, and he's like, hey, yeah, you know what? But hey, let's not focus on that. Even in John 8, the woman caught in adultery. Like, they bring that woman to her, and instead of, like, pointing his finger and, like, all this stuff like that, he writes down in the sand some things, which is believed, as I said last week, it's believed that they were people in the crowd. Maybe he was writing down their sins. And it's a very interesting thing, but he just looks at her and he says, hey, don't sin anymore. Like, that's just it. He took the time to just kind of be with her. It wasn't that he was taking sides and all this stuff, but, like, he was taking time to just be with her. And he was taking time to be with this woman at the well. He wasn't hurried and he wasn't rushed. And he had a conversation with her that changed her life. The time that he spent with the man that was blind for 38 years. We talked about that just a few weeks ago. And he wasn't hurried during that conversation and the conversation that followed. Even with the woman at the well, she went back and got the town. And they came back and they urged him to stay a couple more days. And Jesus could have been like, hey, wait a minute. No, like, I don't got that kind of time. See, it was on my way from Judea to Galilee. Like, I'm going this way and I don't have time to sit here and stay with you. Like, he was traveling, right? He was going on a journey. He didn't want the, like, he could have been like, But that's, I think, what this time thing is for us. Is it's not that we can't be on our phones while we're talking with somebody or have conversations with somebody. It's this hurried time, the time that we spend. Like, the time that we spend with our kids. Are we just, yeah, come on, I'm trying to go to bed. Like, can we have this conversation later? Or, hey, I've got other things to get to. Can we, like, or, like, with our spouse, it's like, you know, hey, I've got, like, I can't, it's this time, this non-hurried time. That's what I think Jesus is calling us to. And that's what I think Jesus sets the example for. Throughout this series, I've said that we're not looking at this series from like a relationship standpoint, as in marriages or parents or our kids or our friends or things like that. We're looking at it from a standpoint of love and how we can love people better. And then that will trickle into our relationships. And this is what this is. This non-hurry time will help us love people better. Yeah, is it going to make us late to something? Yeah, is it going to make us maybe change our calendar? Yeah, I don't know what Jesus had planned in Galilee when he was going back, but he stayed 2 days in Samaria to talk to these people, and he could have easily been like, nah, I got to get back to Galilee. I got a meeting. But he didn't. And I think that is what Jesus is calling us to. That's what Jesus is trying to set the example for. Is that it's not the distractions. It's this, when we do enter into conversations and time with other people, it's this, I got to hurry up and get somewhere, so 5 minutes. And I know that's not easy because you get home from work and you want to just kind of be to yourself for a few minutes. And your wife wants to talk to you, your kids want to talk to you, your friends are like, but that's what God calls us to. That's what Jesus shows the example of. And I think that's where Jesus wants us to have this conversation for our week. Where are we at? What are we doing? This quality time that we spend. Is it quality because, yeah, I'm not saying that you, like, don't get me wrong, quality time, distraction-free is vitally important, okay? Going out to dinner with your spouse and leaving the phones in the car. Oh, but the kids might this, or the kids might blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, yeah, and that's part of the, right? Or having your phones with you, but keeping them away on the table and just having that time. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that kind of quality time or this one-on-one time with your kids where you don't have any distractions. But that's not all of it. It's not necessarily just sitting there staring in a room and just sitting there. But this quality time. I think that is where Jesus calls us to. How are we going to do that better in our relationships as a way of love? Like, being hurried and rushed, sometimes it can be very rude and unloving and unkind. But as we said in 1 Corinthians, love is patient and kind. It is not like irritated and annoyed. And when we're hurried through, or like your neighbor is trying to talk to you and you're just kind of like, hey, I gotta like go, like, I found myself in one of those kind of situations. Like, I was standing outside. I was trying to just take the dog out real quick. My neighbor came out, and she was just having this conversation with me. And I was kind of like, I got to get back in because I got to go get my kid from school. Like, I got to, like, and that was a legitimate thing. And I just felt myself being hurried. And then I just kind of like, you know what? And I just kind of stood there. We had that conversation. And yeah, I was about 5 minutes later to pick my son up from school. And he didn't even really know because, you know, you go early because of car lines, right? But like, it wasn't even that big of a deal. I wasn't that much farther back in line. And so this idea of distraction-free quality time is important and valuable. But this idea of non-hurried time, I think, is more valuable. Because you can sit there and you can have a conversation around watching YouTube short videos about cats and how cats get scared. Like, I love those kind of videos. And I love sitting there with my wife watching those videos or other kind of funny videos like that. And just talking about things. Because watching that kind of stuff brings back things and it leads to other conversations. So those things aren't necessarily the bad things. But this hurried time is, I think. Having good one-on-one time is vitally important, but also having non-hurried one-on-one time is vitally important. And so I feel like that's where Jesus is directing our attention for this week. But also too, and I may get hit like, because this could be like, but quality time with God is important too. Like, I would almost say distraction-free quality time with God is important. Not hurried time with God. So then that way we can understand how we may be able to be non-hurried. And the whole thing is like, when I say hurried, I mean, it's kind of like, okay, I read my paragraph. I read the verse of the day. I spent my time with God. No. Like, actually spend time with God. Talking to Him, listening to Him, reading the Bible. 15 minutes to a half an hour. I don't know what that looks like. Some people spend longer. But I know that sometimes we just want to rush in to that moment with God and rush out because we got the next thing to go to. Or you got to get to work. So I read the verse of the day, so I got my daily God. Is that what's important, right? And see, so when you compare it to that kind of feels, well, I want to spend more time, better time than that with God, but yet we'll rush through our relationships with our kids and our friends and our spouse. Sometimes even spending better time with them than we even do with God. And so that's where I want to leave this conversation, is how do we spend non-hurried time with people and God? How can we spend better time with our people that isn't rushed, that isn't hurried, that isn't just so we can get the conversation done? And the same with God. Like, how can we spend non-hurried time with God that isn't rushed so we can move on to the next thing and be better to our relationships? Because, like I said, we love better when we actually show that we care, right? It's not about like knowing everything about everyone. It's about just spending that time. It shows that you care. John 13:35 says that how you love will show that we follow Jesus. And if people read in the Bible that Jesus slowed down and he spent time with people and they pick up on that, but we're like, go, 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 next. Or we don't have time to pray for you right now. We don't have time to like, that is the opposite of what I think Jesus has for love. And so, just something to think about this week. That's what this episode is. Read John 4. Dig in to see how Jesus interacted with that. Not just that person, but like other people. How he interacted with his disciples. The time he spent with his disciples. Especially in John 13 and on, how that time that he spent. That non-hurried time. He knew what was coming to him. He knew that just in a few hours he was going to be arrested and the whole thing was going to be turned upside down. But this time that he spent with them was vitally important, and he spent time, and he sat with them at dinner, and he washed their feet, and then he walked with them and had this conversation and just told them some things. That's the time that Jesus wants us to spend. Our time, the time spent being non-hurried, non-rushed, not annoyed and irritated because someone comes up to us and wants to have a conversation. That's the kind of time that I think is quality to Jesus. It's not necessarily distraction-free. It's not distraction-free, it's rushed-free. It's non-hurried-free. And so I encourage you with that this week, that the best way that we could probably love is to spend non-hurried time with somebody. Maybe just one somebody or a couple somebodies. I don't know what that looks like. But this non-hurried time that we could spend with somebody, and see what that does for us this week. See what it does with our kids and our spouse. And just continue it on longer than a week, right? I mean, but that's the challenge I think that Jesus has for us. And so we'll leave it at that. Like, where can we spend some non-hurried time, non-rushed time this week with our spouse, with our friends, with our family, with our kids, and all of that. And I hope that you'll tune into next week. I hope you'll come back next week and keep listening as we go through this series. I hope you'll come back next week as we continue on in the love series.